Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and thrilled to tell you about the Codist, now back in print in both Kindle and paperback on Amazon. After that long battle, we've won, we're victorious, and you need to read this biblical thriller. It will take you to a place of understanding about what's happening with Israel, what's happening with Islam, what's happening in the world today, and a weapon that you are unfamiliar with, but you need to familiarize yourself with. If you're sending your DNA out there for 23andMe, for Ancestry.com, you might want to find out exactly what other countries are using that for. I also want to introduce you to my newest book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. If you visit our website, ignitinganation.com, and scroll to the bottom of the page, put in your email address, we'll give you access to the first chapter for free. 7 specific areas, 49 total lessons where God uses things of the natural to reveal supernatural truths. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce you to Mandy Morris, author of the new book, Love, It's How I Manifest. Mandy, in her mission to alleviate pain and spread love frequency, has impacted the lives of thousands globally. She's the creator of the Authentic Program series, which are designed to help individuals remove fear-based living and replace it with fulfillment and peace of mind. Her love-based method for creating instant and lasting change have been studied and used globally. She co-founded Hustle and Heart, a philanthropic initiative aimed at alleviating hunger and providing entrepreneurial advice to children. Mandy, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mandy, the story that you tell and the program that you have developed really grew out of childhood upbringing, founded in what you were taught and what you learned. Kind of walk me through the kind of environment, the house, the home, the world that you grew up in.
Yeah, my family, we were raised in between Catholic and Christianity. And my mother said when I was just about to turn 3, I opened the Bible one day. We always did our church at home, we called it, on Sunday nights. And I opened the Bible and I began reading it. And she was like, where did you learn to read? And how do you know how to read the Bible? And I was like, Bartholomew crossed the Tigris River. And so it kind of stemmed this deep connection that I've always had with God, which is really what carried me through a lot of trials and traumas in my childhood. My parents had divorced at a young age, and all of the things that come with that. And the only thing really that stayed true to me throughout my entire journey up into adolescence was I would write all the time. I would journal everything about my life the way I thought. And then I also had a God journal where I would write to God and, thank God for everything that I had and ask for things and pray for people and so forth. And so through that writing was really what stemmed my studies on how do we alleviate the world from pain. Traumas are going to happen. We're going to be tested at times. And how do we lift one another up?
In this search, your parents divorced, but they kept you going to church. They kept you going to an education where you learned about God, you learned about Jesus, you learned about the foundational message of love. But a point in life came where that message kind of became a little bit convoluted because of something we commonly talk about here on this program is religion is something that man has created. Faith is what God has created. And there was some messaging that you were beginning to hear, and it was impactful to you, not in a necessarily positive way. What was it that you were hearing? That you knew the message, but what was it that you were hearing in the presentation of the message?
Absolutely. There was some components that always resonated with me where, I always knew, and, Jesus was my role model. We talked about this last night. talking to God, having that connection. I never turned away from God. I was never angry at God. I was really fortunate to not have that. I hear a lot of people talk about that. That was never the case. And I remember, switching between the Catholic Church and an Episcopalian church and the Christian church, and hearing different messaging. I started getting confused of, well, what is the ultimate truth here, and what is everyone trying to get at? And that's really when I kept bringing back love. It's like everyone's trying to create love from within, bring it in from God and facilitate it for our brothers and our sisters. But where's there separation being created between the churches and the religions? And then, of course, it spanned out into me being like, why is there a racial divide? Why is there any type of human divide? But love was what always kind of molded it back together.
Well, and of course, that is the message. When Jesus was asked what are the two greatest commands, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength. And then he said, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So love was the theme of that message. I had a guest on yesterday who is a PhD and head of a large university, and teaches on the things that separate us. We're the same but different, but we're no longer unified. We've lost a sense of unity or identity because of denominations, and because the messaging of each denomination may have the same gospel message in the fact that Jesus was the Messiah and that salvation would come through him and access to God would come through him. But then there became these rules and regulations and lifestyle and what you can do and what you can't do. And was that where you began to struggle with understanding the language of the message of love that's in the Bible?
Yes, absolutely. It was the interpretations and the human language. I always say the human language is the best way for us to misunderstand one another. I can say something and we can interpret it however we so choose. And I remember specifically when I was about 12 years old, we were going to an Episcopalian church at the time, and there was a woman there who was so loving to me, and she was so angry towards my mother, and we could never figure out why. And I remember saying, why is there a divide? Why is this person judging this person or feeling like someone is either above or below? And those were questions that I couldn't vocalize, and so I was trying to figure them out on my own. And that was actually where I started separating from church a few years after that that was really where I was very confused, was in my teenage years. I think any teenager is a little bit confused sometimes, especially when you pull away from God. And I said, I'm not going to church anymore. And I didn't actually step back into a church until I was 20. So I had a very long amount of time where I was still writing to God, still talking to God, still praying, but trying to understand it from within and figure out what does all of this stuff mean. But I was trying to do it by myself, which of course created a convoluted message even within me.
When did you begin to try to create a language or a message that you felt would resonate with people who were like yourself, that were seeing, and I kind of want to set the stage here. Yeah. This woman loved you because you didn't represent something to her that was in violation of quote-unquote church doctrine, but your mother was divorced. Yeah. And that represented a great breach in adherence to the biblical commands of not to divorce. So in that, rather than loving the way God loves, of course, it tells us that God hates divorce, that this is not the model he created, but there is sin in the world, and there are things that separate us from a lot of the fullness of the life that we could have, and others wind up taking a very judgmental position almost to the point of condemnation.
Mm.
And yet the Bible itself says there is no condemnation with God. So is this where you began to realize that it was the style, the language, the people infusing their opinion or their perspective about what the message was, and then becoming, Paul writes that we're ambassadors. We have good ambassadors and bad ambassadors. We have ambassadors that help us bring peace to nations, and we have ambassadors that offend nations. So that's part of the human condition, is that there are places within us that others judge us for, when it tells us that we are not to be judgmental unless we want to be judged the same way.
Right. Yes.
So what did this do for you? What did this do to you, and what did it do for you? Because out of the negative, you tried to take a positive approach to recapturing what that foundational message of love was all about.
Yeah, it was looking and really reflecting on what is quote unquote wrong about this model, what feels so heavy about this. And it was that the love was so conditional. And I felt, in my entire relationship with God and Jesus, I was like, it's never felt conditional. I've never, even in the moments where I felt like I was broken, or I felt like I wasn't doing enough and Jesus wouldn't like it or something, in my very young age, I was always trying to go above and beyond, trying to fulfill, what I thought would make, God proud, if you will. But there was never a time that I felt that God didn't love me, or that there was a condition to it. And there was never anyone that I looked at and said, I wouldn't love you either. And that included, and I remember having this conversation with one of my with my stepfather, actually. And he had said, how could you love the murderer? How could you love someone who came in, and what if they hurt one of your family members? How could you love them? And he was so angry at it. And I remember thinking, I don't know. I just think that I would like to be like Jesus and hope that I could. And it sparked this. Why would someone be angry that I would love so unconditionally, that I could love people who have done terrible things? And I said, I believe that God loves us that way. I believe that there are parents who love their children even if they do wrong. I believe that. And I'm going to stick to that. But I realized that it was such a deep source of pain for people because they couldn't pull that love into themselves. So they said, how could you love someone else? When really what they were saying is, I can't love myself. And that was finding the root problem.
Many times we've seen on television at the trial of or a sentencing of a murderer, and a family member gets up to speak and says, I just want you to know that I forgive you for killing my son.
Yeah.
And people in general sit back and are shocked that that's the response. But that really is the Christian response, is that I absolutely hate what you did. You've destroyed something that was so precious and so valuable to me. But the message is that if I can't forgive, then I really can't be forgiven. If I hold out a standard to you, if God is willing to forgive, then how can I place myself above God in withholding forgiveness? So we're always moved when we see those television moments where the mother or the father is getting up and they're interviewing them, and they say, how could you possibly forgive the person that murdered your child? How can you do that? And they always go back to the same statement, is that I know what I've been forgiven of. And if I've been forgiven of what I have been forgiven of, how can I withhold forgiveness? That doesn't mean that when I say that I love that person in the Lord. In the natural, that person is appalling, offensive, repulsive, repugnant. They represent evil. They represent everything that I hate. However, I can't put myself in place of God. There's only one to judge, and that's God. And yes, they took a precious part of my life, and I will never recover from that loss, but I'm not going to add to it by feeding it bitterness and vitriol and rage and anger and destroy myself. And especially in these cases where the perpetrator shows no remorse. They express no remorse. So you go to bed at night with hatred towards somebody who's offended you or hurt you, and they go to bed at night and they don't think about you at all. Mm-hmm. And so who's the one who is sick, and who's the one who's ill, and who's the one who's really suffering? You would want there to be some form of judgment and some form of punishment, but you're actually being the one being punished because you're holding on to this bitter root, this bitter anger. And one of the things, and I want the audience to know, you and I had a lengthy conversation last night because I was concerned that your book was placed not in a faith segment of Amazon, but it was placed in a motivational segment of Amazon. And the language that you use is almost borderline New Age, or what people would consider to be universalism, or everything's okay, and no matter what you do, everything's fine in the end. And that's really not the message that you conveyed to me last night. Was that your focus was there are people walking around who are wounded, who are hurt, they've been hurt by others, and they don't know how to find love for themselves. And if they can't find love for themselves, they can't be open to receiving love from anybody. And so if you help them clear that path towards understanding that God created them to be loved, He created them that He loved them first, then they can be open to loving God and loving other people and feeling love. And this was where our conversation went last night, and I wanted our audience to understand that this was intentional on your part to use a language to reach people that were not the message of condemnation, the message of legalism, the message of quote-unquote religion in some cases is what pushed them away as opposed to pulled them in. And they bought into this description of themselves of yes, it's true that we all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But if that's all you think about, if that's all you focus on, then you're walking around carrying this image of yourself that says that I'm the worst possible thing on earth. No one should have anything to do with me because I'm worthless. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lot of times the way we frame the message and the language we use. And from our conversation, it was your intention to find a language that would be more palpable, more open towards removing the barriers so that people could find love for themselves, because that command is love your neighbor as yourself. Well, if you don't love yourself, you're not going to love your neighbor. If you are self-loathing, well then, if that's how you love yourself with loathing, then you're going to loathe your neighbor. And all of a sudden, you're going to find yourself isolated, and you're going to find yourself crippled because of fear, because of rejection, because of abandonment, because of this hurt that has really been done not intentionally. I don't believe that all these different denominations and all this different messaging was created to hurt anybody. But there are people who walk away from it hurt by the message because of the way maybe their mother spoke to them, or their father spoke to them, or their coach spoke to them. And people forget the human condition is as we model ourselves, our love model is mom and dad before our love model is God. And so when we're in that kind of circumstance, when we're in that kind of situation, we tend to pull away as opposed to run towards. And in your book, Love, It's How I Manifest on Abundance and Happiness, Joy and Peace of Mind, this is kind of the area that you begin to delve into from a perspective of kind of self-examination, self-forgiveness, starting with and it's not that everybody's a God and that we are created in the image of God, but we are not God. But if you can't forgive yourself, and it's actually the 4th chapter of your book delves right into that particular area, because if you can't clear the slate and understand self-forgiveness, you couldn't possibly believe that someone else or God could forgive you.
Absolutely.
We're talking with Mandy Morris, author of Love, It's How I Manifest on Happiness, Abundance, Joy, and Peace of Mind, just released this past March. Being released this past March. She's created 30 massively impactful tools to create a life of everlasting truth and peace. And when we come back, we're going to dig into some of these topics of how do you forgive yourself? How do you find that place where you can be reached so that you can feel a relationship, first with yourself and then with your Creator. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only 2 ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Mandy Morris, author of Love, It's How I Manifest, on abundance, happiness, joy, and peace of mind. Mandy, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much.
Mandy, you conduct workshops. You have people that come into your home and into your center there and spend several days. I think some spend several weeks with you. And you've written this book and you've picked a linguistic style that is more universal messaging of love. I would say that from what I've read, it is predominantly the same message of the Bible, but the framework is just a little bit different. And why did you choose to do that? And what impact has it had on some of the people that have come through the workshop?
Thank you so much for asking that question, because a big thing with me changing my terminology and some of the verbiage I use was I had so many individuals who would come to me and they had experienced really like a loss of self, loss of connection to God, and just the confusion of what is really for me and how do I bring back all of that love. And that was really it, was figuring out if I can change the verbiage in a way that will make sense to people and that doesn't hold them to one religion or hold them to one belief system. If I can kind of pepper in all of these different thoughts and ideas to bring everybody back to the umbrella of love, then I'm okay with that. I will do that, and that will bring them back to God's love as well, without me having to say it in a way that, because of their past or because of maybe some previous experiences in their particular church or whatever it was, that they would shut down and wouldn't be able to receive my love. It was me bringing in something that was less quote unquote threatening in that moment, that would allow for them to at least crack open that space again, to allow for that light, that love to come through again, and to feel. I mean, ultimately it's God's love. Of course we say we feel each other's love, and it's that fullness and that peace of mind is what I talk about and so forth. That's God's love. That is the deepest and most healing space that we can be in. And I guess I decided, you know what? It's okay if my verbiage sounds different, if it's going to get them to come back to that love.
So you've had people come to you. You have about a 5.5 minute video on your website. What is that website address?
mandymorris.love.
mandymorris.love. And on there were people sharing that they heard life-changing truth. Would you say that that life-changing truth lines up with the message of the Bible?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In regards to God's love, again, any of those events that we do, the biggest thing that everybody walks away with, that they're like, it was like we were in a love bubble the whole time, and we could truly heal and truly release and feel perfect again, and feel that love, and it's so deeply healing. And so, a lot of what changes them is just by being in that environment and being reminded of how amazing that they are, and allowing that love in. It creates a drastic change in their lives because they haven't been allowing that in. Maybe their lives look a certain way, or their marriages look a certain way, or they have these ideas and thoughts of their parents or their job and so forth. And you get to clean all that for a moment and bring them back to love. It does amazing things for their life.
It's interesting that this is actually drawn from your own life experience. This is not something that was theoretical or something that was a master's dissertation that you went out and did a lot of research. You worked in a scrapyard.
I did for years.
And as I told you last night, my family has been in the iron and steel junk business, scrap recycling business for generations. Yeah. And it's something that there's a whole world out there that deals with the discards, with the scrap, with what we would think were rejection, but this is the core of recycling, and this is the of repurposing. And as I read parts and segments of the book, I kind of saw a little bit of junkyard mentality, which is a person that and say that's a bunch of junk. But an artist would look at that pile of steel and say, wow, I see a tree, and I see welding it together this way and creating an amazing piece of art from it. All of the bronze castings, all of the sculptures that are metal, are all items which are taken and melted down and reformed and reshaped out of the basic elements that were thrown into the pot, into the smelter's pot, in order to come and be able to pour into a mold that was chiseled out by hand or by machine or by whatever tool, to take something that had no form, fit, or function and to turn it into something that was valuable and to be admired and to be appreciated. And I think it kind of parallels your years in the junkyard into how you explain to people that what is one person's junk is really God's treasure.
Absolutely. It's amazing what literally a perspective shift can do in someone's life, where they go, I am these things, this is my identity, or I'm broken. And you go, well, let's just turn our heads to the right for a moment. Let's just see if that's really true. And they go, wait a second, maybe I'm not so broken, or maybe I can rise above, maybe I can help people, maybe I am good enough to love the world. And then they go out and they start doing that.
In your chapter on forgiveness, which I think that you have a chapter on self-forgiveness, then you have another chapter devoted just to forgiveness. So first I'll begin with myself, and I've got to forgive myself for my own bad decisions or the consequences of my own actions. Then I have to then look at the fact that now that I've been able to forgive myself, can I forgive others? That's what really begins to open up this capacity to then feel forgiven by God and to reestablish that connection with God that allows us to be human and fallible, but yet still know that we have a trust that there's this unbroken connection that we have with God, who has provided forgiveness for us and a way and a path of forgiveness. Think back on some of the more profound experiences, stories that people came to you with of brokenness or woundedness, and how they left. What changes took place in them?
It's funny. A lot of them end up working for me because they change so much, and I'm like, they're amazing. But one thing, when anyone who comes to me, and this is, I could be walking into a Burger King, I do my best to always look at everyone in their truest state, if you will, in God's eyes. I try to see through God's eyes how beautiful and perfect they probably are. And I treat them as such. And usually that's not the typical feedback that they're getting from the world because they don't believe it themselves. And so someone can come in to, a workshop or just an environment with me, and they might be completely incapacitated. And they can walk out completely empowered to go out. And the only thing I ask is that you will go out and you will do something beautiful for the world, that you will create a ripple effect of goodness and love. And a lot of them end up going out and starting, maybe a nonprofit, or they write a book, or they start their business, or I'm like, hey, I think you should work for me, and let's keep pushing the love out there. So the results have been absolutely amazing. What love can do to someone, true, and everyone has their perception of what love is. So they might be like, love can't do all of those things, but when you go back to, okay, well, what's the idea of love? What does love mean to you, or how has it been withheld from you? If you get to that really, I call it like clean love, like that really godly love, it can do that. It can move mountains.
What's really interesting is that last week, February 12th to February 17th, was not a very much publicized National Random Acts of Kindness Week.
Yes. That
was kind of where the pitch came from, and we tried to work it out on the calendar. It just didn't work. But this whole concept of why random acts of kindness inspire a happier and more fulfilled life. In a 2006 study at Johns Hopkins, people who provided social support to others reduced stress and lowered blood pressure, had lower blood pressure and lower stress than people who didn't. A 2008 study by Harvard Business School found that giving money to someone else lifted the person who gave it happiness more than spending it on themselves. Brain chemistry, actual science, also scientists believe that altruistic behavior releases endorphins in the brain, producing the positive feeling known as a helper's high. Philanthropy doles out several different happiness chemicals, including dopamine, endorphins that give people a sense of euphoria, oxytocin, which I just did an interview on love, sex, and marriage from a godly, biblical perspective, that just a hug releases oxytocin. This is a natural, you don't need artificial drugs. God's already created all of this for us, and that giving is contagious, that it creates a ripple effect. And when we see that there is what you're doing has created a ripple effect. You've taken what you've done with others and you've turned it into a philanthropic organization, which is realizing that a lot of these issues that we're facing in America deal at the childhood level, at the very foundational level. Hungry kids don't learn. Hungry kids can't pay attention. So you created a way to take some of the proceeds from your book and from your minute, and it's a ministry that you have to others that would be given back into the community in the form of helping children before they get so broken that they turn and reject the system that's supposed to protect them. They wind up rejecting it, and they become the outcast as opposed to the secure and loved child that God created them to be.
Yes, it's so amazing because most of our philanthropic initiatives right now are in the Philippines and in very, very dark places in the Philippines. And these children, now I have a team of about 10 out there who go out and they do, I send them all the money and I'm like, okay, what are we doing now? And they, send me all the pictures and the videos, and I get letters from these kids, and they can't even understand that there's someone across the world that loves them so much, that doesn't know them, that wants to make sure that they eat today, that wants to make sure that they have pencils in their backpack, that wants to go out and teach them, how to love the world. And it is through those actions, and it, makes me tear up because I love these children so much, that they remember that humanity is beautiful and that there are people who will always love them and reach their hands out to them.
Where did we get away from this idea that we're supposed to help each other? That the person who's on the street that's got their hand out because they're homeless, people are inclined to say, I know that if I give them $5, they're just going to go use it for drugs or alcohol, when they're actually just hungry and they need it for food. And if I don't give, and Jesus says, give to the one who asks. It doesn't say give with conditions. It doesn't say give with judgment. It says give to the one who asks. We've almost can see people when they see somebody at the end of the street will actually pull into a different lane. They'll go out of their way to avoid that. We have a veterans homeless problem where people who have gone to battle, and because of PTSD and because of not knowing where they fit into the world when they've gone out and they've had to take lives doing the job that they were hired to do, serving their country and defending their country, and now their country is rejecting them. We missed the mark in a lot of ways from a commercial. We've commercialized things. So your program is forgiveness, but then turning that around. And I'm looking at your chapter on communicating unselfishly, that they find the words that you were able to find to reach others who we would put them in the lost column, but they're not lost to God. They're kind of lost to society in a way, or have been wounded. And we know that there's a lot of people that have been wounded in the church and have blamed God for the actions of others and wind up angry. And this is the source of a lot of child abuse and spousal abuse and a lot of anger issues that seem to be a huge problem. How do you address that?
It's like the intention. I always look at the intention and I ask myself why. So let's say that my spouse and I were having a conversation and it's not going anywhere healthy. We can feel that there's not love in that conversation. Well, why? What was my intention? Was my intention to be heard? Was my intention to hurt because I'm hurting? And if we stop for a moment and we say, well, what's the reason? Why? Why am I not able to communicate with my mother right now? Why? What is the intention here? What am I really trying to achieve here? I'm usually trying to get back to love and connection with and you said this last night. You were talking about community is common unity. We need one another. But if it's not safe for us to receive love directly because of our perceptions or because of the way we were raised or again, the traumas that we've experienced, we stop receiving love in a healthy and genuine way. You know, you and I last night, we brought so much love and had such a beautiful conversation, even if sometimes we may have used different verbiage, because we were both meeting in the middle, you know, and of course God was filling up that conversation. But when we are doing it to be heard, or we are doing it just for us, or to keep ourselves hidden or safe, the love can't flow. And that's where we create the disruption. That's where the abuse starts really creating itself, because no one is hearing one another. Everyone's just talking, if that makes sense.
It's interesting that you talk about abundance. Of course, my book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, you know, there's, and it's not a prosperity gospel. It's not that you're going to get rich. It's that you're going to feel the richness of the love of God, which is the greatest wealth that you can possibly have, is to feel love and to give love. Yeah. Financially, people look in, and that's how they measure, by the size of your home or the kind of car that you drive. But relationally, we've lost the sense of community. We've lost the sense of relationship. We've become a society that puts ourselves first, when every instruction we get from the Bible is to put the other person first. That the first shall be last and the last shall be first, is the teaching. So in this last, we've got about 3 minutes. What do you want to say to those out there that are watching right now, that have been hurt, that have been wounded by harsh messaging that they felt was condemnation, not exaltation? What would you say to them, and what would you want them to walk away with?
My biggest message would be that no matter what happens in life, no matter whom tells you something that doesn't strike a chord with you, that there's never a good enough reason to walk away from God's love and to extend love to another. It will always, may not immediately, but it will always come back to something that will be healing, something that will be absolutely beautiful, and will lead to that idea of abundance, that feeling that I am fulfilled every day in my work, in my life, in my family, and in my connection to God. And it is only when you turn yourself from that, or you believe that you're unworthy of that, and you forget that it's already there for you. It's right in front of you. And remembering to just, open your arms and receive it, that I'm right here, and whoever is listening right now, I love you. I love you so much. And God obviously loves you. And even if you can't pull it in right now, or if someone has told you that you're unworthy of it, or there's been experiences that have made you pull away from that love, it's still there. It's waiting for you, and you deserve it.
Well, as the scriptures say, God is love. And that is the message, that for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whomsoever should believe in him would not perish but would have eternal life. Mandy Morris, author of Love, It's How I Manifest, on abundance, happiness, joy, and peace of mind. It has just been a privilege and a pleasure to have you on the program with us here on Revealing the Truth. And may God bless all the works of your hands, and the children in the Philippines that you help and continue to help. May their lives be changed forever, that they've received this message of love, that it's God's love that comes through us. In our own strength, we're barely capable of doing almost anything. But in his strength, we're able to love unconditionally, and that's exactly what he's asking us to do. And that message comes through in those two greatest commands, to love him first and then to love each other. And that sums up, as he says, that sums up all of the law and all of the prophets and all of the messaging. All we need is love. The Beatles said it, God said it, and Mandy Morris says it. Mandy, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.